Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today for our Budget Proposals 101 seminar for postdocs. This has been something that we have been in the plan since the beginning of the year, so we are very excited to have it. And I am Veronica Ruiz. I am the current president of the Postdoctoral Association, and I'm here to introduce and I will act as a moderator of this webinar. This webinar is being recorded, so it will be available for the revision later, and also all the materials here will be available. And here today we have two great panelists. We have Jen Viviani, which is the Director of Research Development, and she's responsible for assisting faculty, staff, and students with finding funding, creating proposals, and sometimes budgets. And she has over 20 years of grant administration experience. And then we also have Muriel Industrias. She's the Associate Director in the Office of Sponsored Programs. She oversees the Proposal Services Unit and provides the institutional review of all proposals. She has been working in research administration for 18 years in several different areas. So they are great people to talk about these topics. During this talk, please, we encourage you to use the Q&A section to submit your questions. Please do not use the chat, use the Q&A. Both Janine and Muriel have told me that I can interrupt them with the questions as they go on, or we also, like, depending on how they are, the nature, they also can be done at the end. So you can put them at any time. And with that, I will just leave the floor for them to start with the presentation. Welcome and thank you.
Thanks so much, Veronica. We really appreciate it. Doing these types of things are near and dear to our heart because we really like to reach out and help faculty and postdocs at the level that you're at. I'm going to go ahead and share our slide deck. Okay, so as Veronica said, we're going over grant proposal budgeting. It's going to be an informal kind of conversation. We don't want to get too into the weeds, but I think it's important. It's a good primer for all of you as postdocs. So let me kind of go over quickly the course overview. We really want to kind of start really at the fundamentals for grants. We want to talk about the components of a grant. We want to talk about maybe some strategies. We really do welcome any kind of questions in between. So if something comes up and it really doesn't make sense, feel free to reach out to Veronica and she'll interrupt us, not a problem. And there is a lot of detail in here. Muriel has done an amazing job with like the detail of what you need to know, particularly at FAU. So I'm kind of going to give you like maybe some high level stuff, but Muriel will really give you the nuts and bolts of things as we go along. So where do you want to start as a postdoc for finding funding? That's what you have to do first, is find the funding. And so what we have here at FAU is Grant Forward. If you haven't signed up for it, I really encourage you to do that now. You can save searches, you can look for keywords, but if you go to grantforward.com, especially if you're on the FAU campus, you can search right away. And then if you create a profile, you can save the searches and be able to go back anywhere other than not being on the IP for the institution. The other thing where you should really start also is talking to your research mentor, who your supervisor is. It's really important that as you're a postdoc coming in and you're assisting in basically somebody else's research, in addition to trying to do your own, that you kind of have their interests also in mind as well. And so talking to them, maybe they might be able to assist. Also talk to colleagues inside and outside FAU. And we'd really like to see the postdocs here at FAU be more engaged and talk about your research more often. And this office, the Office of Research Development, we're happy to talk to postdocs and offer all types of other support as well. So when you go on to Grant Forward and you find that wonderful grant that you want to apply for, really take a look at the RFP in these particular sections. Every RFP is written this way, regardless of source. So it could be federal, it could be state, but they're all going to have the similar requirements of overview of a document, why is the research program, why it's there and what it's looking to accomplish, what are the proposal requirements, including eligibility, budget requirements in terms of sections, which this workshop is going to go over the different types of budgets that you can, the sections of the budget. But the important part of any RFP is really the end. How is your proposal going to be reviewed by those that you're submitting the proposal to? And so when you're writing a document, if it's saying it's looking for a particular intellectual merits, looking for a particular broader impact, it's going to be judging you or rating you on a particular area. You need to work backwards. So always look at that scientific review criteria. Muriel?
Good morning. So let's jump into the budget basics. So one of the first things after you thought about you're going to write a proposal is brainstorming your budget details. So as Jeannie mentioned, the guidelines. Check the sponsor guidelines first before developing your budget. There may be restrictions that you need to be aware of what you cannot include in your budget. Write a short summary of what you plan on doing and why it's important. After the why, your research idea, then the who, what, when, where, and how. Those are critical to developing your budget. Next slide. So there are some budget formats and templates that are standard. So with NIH, there's the standard template of the SF424, which is the detailed budget. It's called research and related, but it's a detailed budget of what you're looking for from the sponsor and why do you need the funds. Now there's also a nonprofit may have their own template requirements, and a lot of foundations do have a specific template that they would like you to use. In the state of Florida, and may have their own. FAU, on our website, we do have an Excel spreadsheet that is awesome. It includes already the fringe rates already included, and so the IDC is already embedded in there also. There is a link, we do have a link on the PowerPoint slide that will take you to the forms. And when this is sent out, it'll be easy for you to access the forms on our website. Next slide. So the anatomy of a typical budget, Jeannie.
Yeah, I like this one because I like the little skeleton, because that's usually how postdocs feel after you go through writing a budget. So I figured I'd throw that one out there for you. But this is super high level, right? So this is the big components that go into your budget. Personnel, obviously you are the personnel. We put a little asterisk there because currently right now you cannot be a lead PI on most proposals unless it's directed towards a postdoc specifically. But in order to submit a proposal through FAU, our policy is you have to have either your mentor or a faculty member, a permanent staff member, if you will, be the lead PI. But more than likely you're probably writing it, so this is good for you anyway, right? Other personnel, you want grad students, equipment. That's any type of item that's over $5,000, travel, be it domestic or international, participant or trainee support. So that could be you have a bunch of undergrads going through your lab for maybe a week, maybe they're getting a stipend. Other direct costs, of course, which includes everything other than those things practically at this point, from consultants to subcontractors to all manner and number of things. And Muriel will definitely go over those. Facilities and administrative costs, which is also referred to as indirects. Those are not a tax on your budget. Those are institutional costs that we can't recover, and very good detailed explanation. Muriel will be going into that later on. And then there's also something called cost share, and that's the portion of which a budget, if the budget allows for it or requires it, where you get paid by FAU, but you're going to work on the grant. So that's considered cost share. But these are very detailed. This is very, very high level, and there's a lot of detail behind this that you'll be able to take home with you after this. Muriel, let's get into the detail.
So expanded details. So senior and key person on the budget. As Jeannie said, you will be on this proposal. But also there's a principal investigator who, if it's who has to be there, as Jeannie mentioned, that postdocs cannot be the PI in a budget. So other senior and key personnel, maybe there are other faculty members that are on your budget also. So those will be listed as senior. And then it could be common senior personnel or is other PIs, co-investigator. Now NIH doesn't recognize the co-PI. So in NIH case, it's just a co-investigator, but for other sponsors, they will recognize the co-PI. Per FAU policy, every senior key individual must commit a minimum of 1% effort on the project. Now, this is the policy, but you should always aim to put the effort that you need to complete the scope of work on the project that the budget that you're going to send to the sponsor and request funding. Other personnel on the budget may be graduate students, undergrads, maybe you need a lab technician, a research technician. And in most of these cases, these individuals will also commit effort and salary on the project. Equipment. If there's a piece of equipment that's not available at FAU in any of the cores, then, and if the RFA allows it, you can request that on your budget. Now, a piece of equipment is defined as costing $5,000 or more. And a piece of equipment is excluded from F&A or indirect or overhead. So when you include a piece of equipment on the budget, you have to justify why this equipment is necessary. So it could be necessary because you needed to complete the scope of the project and it's not available at FAU. So we have to buy it. Next.
Could I throw something else in there since we're talking to postdocs? You'll notice under other personnel, it says postdocs, right? So this is typically what we would want a faculty member here to do, is to write a proposal to actually pay for your salary, if you will, on the proposal. This isn't going to be you per se, because you're already here. You would be more than likely a co-I or co-PI, and there could be money in there for another postdoc, let's say. But I wanted to make sure that you all understood that this wasn't you in the postdoc category for the other personnel, because you're postdocs, because wanted to make sure you weren't like having to worry about making your own salary.
Right. Thank you, Jeannie. Yes. Travel. So including your budget, if you're going to have to travel, maybe you're going to present at a conference, maybe you're traveling from the Boca campus to University of Miami to do some research, to work with your counterpart there. So maybe you need to include that in your budget. So in most cases, domestic and international travel is an allowable expense. Now, travel, there's some rules to travel. So travel has to follow uniform guidance and the federal government travel regulations. And everything always has to follow the state of Florida guidelines, as we are a state of Florida university. So one of the examples of the federal government travel requirements is fly a US flag carrier, per diem rates, and transportation expenses. Travel must relate to the specific aims and be clearly justified. So in our budget, we like to see in the travel, who's going, why you're going, how long are you going, what's the cost for the hotel, you have mileage, per diem, do we have a fee for this conference? So we want to see all of that included in your travel expense. Participant training support. So under uniform guidance, participant support costs are direct costs for stipends or substance, travel allowance, and registration fees paid to or on behalf of a participant with a conference or training project. So if your proposal you're seeking funding for has a training component, that you're going to have a workshop here at FAU or somewhere else, and it's going to have participants, you're including 20, it's going to be open for 20 high school students to attend, or maybe 20 undergraduate students. So in that participant support category for this training, you can include the cost for travel allowance for them to reach to the conference, the registration for the conference, and any fees that will be part of the conference. And it may be a stipend to cover other expenses that they may incur coming to this workshop or the conference. What is not a participant support, and this gets a lot of, even faculty members get this confused, is participant support are not incentives or gift cards to an individual participate in a study or project. So those are incentives for participating in a study as a human subject, but participant support is participate in a conference or a training project. So I know you may get those a little bit mixed up, but everyone does, so it's very common. Now, certain sponsors do not allow participant support unless prior approval is provided or identified in a specific RFP or announcement. And the last category is other direct costs, which is just a place to catch everything that doesn't have a specific line item. So other direct costs, materials and supplies, what you may need to get the project done, maybe Petri dishes, need buy files or something else, publication costs, you want to publish when you finish your research, consultant services, you may need to hire a consultant on this project, ADP computer services, laptops or computers. And just to note that laptops and computers now are not considered equipment unless it's over $5,000. But when you include a laptop or a computer in your budget, you must have a really good justification for this laptop. You may have a subaward on this consortium of contractual costs, equipment or facility rental user fees. Alterations and renovations may be included, but it's very rare. Animal care, if you're going to be using animals in your research, tuition, and any other costs that may fall on it.
Hey, Mariel, I will enter in here because we have a question in the Q&A on this topic. So the question is, are software licenses for lab personnel usually allowed in federal grants? And I believe they will go in that category.
Software licenses?
Software licenses for lab personnel.
For a lab person?
Yeah.
For lab personnel on a grant. So I gather it doesn't even matter who it's for. Can you charge software licenses in a grant?
In a federal grant.
So we've had some where they have specifically said you can include the licensing fee, and some that have said no. So again, it all depends on what the RFA is allowed.
If you can also make a justification of why the software is specific and necessary for the grant itself, yes. Typically it should be okay, unless Muriel said, unless they say, no, you absolutely cannot. The other thing I would check too is, let's not be redundant, because we have software licenses everywhere at FAU, and we might even already have it. And you could use it from, let's say, the library, or maybe another college has it. And so always important to at least ask, because we might already have it.
Yes, and usually if we see that you're including a software license and it's allowable for that budget in that RFA, we do look at OIT's website and see if you have that license freely available.
Exactly.
There, as Jeannie said, we have a lot of software licenses.
A lot
of individuals do not know about, but there is a lot of them.
Yeah, definitely. Good question, though. Good question. And that would be under other direct costs, by the way. So that would be somewhere here.
Right there at the bottom of the direct costs.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so this is the fun stuff. So it's a short and sweet type of thing about what can you charge and what you can't charge to a grant. Now, the Muriel had mentioned uniform guidance, and that is kind of like our cost Bible, if you will, to to anything that we put into a grant. So we have to meet the 4 conditions about what is allowable. Is it necessary for the grant, first and foremost? So that's an easy one. Most people can go check, yes, I need that. But however, is it reasonable? So when you look over at the unallowable costs, unreasonable costs wouldn't be allowed. So if you're paying $3,000 for 10,000 Petri dishes, no. Because the other thing too is, even if you can buy in bulk, only the pieces that are required to do the grant. So if you only need 2 Petri dishes and you're buying 10, just because you're buying in bulk, you can't charge all 10 to your grant. So it's an unreasonable cost, and it's also not, the next one, allocable to the grant. So you can't charge a grant for 10 if you're only using 2. So those 2 things sometimes get a little muddy for most faculty, let alone for you as a postdoc or anybody else writing out what is an allowable or unallowable cost on a grant. We also have to be consistent, right? And so we can't charge a federal government in a grant proposal something we ourselves would not pay for. So it's kind of like, well, I'm going to pay $2,000 for this computer, but if I had to charge my department, I couldn't spend that much money. It has to be consistent. You can't overcharge the federal government. And I always like to throw out little tidbits of kind of like what's allowable and not allowable. And so in my past, in my career of working with faculty over and over again of what's allowable and not allowable, I've heard of everything from I need organic food on my when I travel because I have a particular illness. That's not allowable to spend more money on organic food. Although if you do have a legitimate reason to have a particular dietary restriction that might cost more, you would still then require a doctor's note that just says this individual needs a special diet. We don't need the diagnosis or anything else like that, but this is a real world example. I've also had faculty ask me, can I charge my roofer to the grant because I need to cover my roofing costs? No, you can't charge stuff like that to a grant. You would think that would be an obvious. But another example is I had a faculty member ask me for bar stools. And I said, why on earth would you need bar stools on your grant? Well, she had undergraduates in her laser lab that had to sit for long periods of time doing pipetting and doing other things. Unfortunately, that is still not a grant cost, even though those undergraduates should be made to feel a little bit more comfortable, but that's still not an allowable cost for the grant. So those are just some kind of off the wall examples of what's allowable and not. And so unallowable by the federal definition, and did I get this one right, Muriel, or did I jump ahead? Is this one mine? Oh, Muriel cut out. I guess she probably had a freeze on that. She'll come back in. So let me go over unallowable costs by the uniform guidance and also by what we allow at FAU. Obviously, when you look at the bullet point, all of these are no-nos on a grant per se. So I've kind of mentioned some of like, you can't have alcohol or fundraising or antiques. I mean, those are kind of pretty much all the same. The other thing that's also not allowable, again, it seems to kind of seem counterintuitive, but if you have certain staff or salary on a grant that's in excess of what they normally get charged by the university, you can't charge, again, the federal government more than what you yourself are getting paid by the university. FAU's research accounting department has a great source of policies on this, and when we send the slides out to all of you who attended, that would be the link. Hey there, Muriel. I know sometimes these things happen.
Yeah, we're having technical issues on camera.
I forgot. Was this slide also me, or was this one you?
That's you.
Okay, so I just went through it, and of course, if there's any questions, people could ask. But we have great policies out there that talk about what is allowable and not allowable, and so we didn't want to go into all of detail about the policies because you can go find that information too. Okay, but the next one I definitely know is Muriel because this one will always trip me up as well.
The salaries and effort on the grant. So the effort is the time you're going to devote to a particular activity, usually expressed as a percentage of person months of the total time spent on the activity. So when we say the activity, we're talking about the proposal, your award, how much time is needed for you that you need to complete the scope of work. So that is a judgment call that you're going to have to decide, well, I need this amount of time to each year to complete this scope of work. So these activities that I have set out for year one, I'm going to need this amount of time. Year two, I may need a little bit more time. So you're going to put in more effort during that time. So effort can also be represented by the individual salary, as effort and salary go hand in hand. Generally, compensation for personnel services is the largest expense charged to a sponsored award, and that is absolutely correct. So when we calculate your effort, we're basing it on your institutional base salary. So one FTE is a full-time equivalent. Part-time would be 0.5 FTE. So the salary cap right now that NIH is using is executive level 2 salary cap, which is $203,700. That is for any individual who institutional base salary is higher than 203. So if your salary is 225,000, we're going to base your effort and the salary you're charging, we're going to use $203,700 as our base salary. Next slide.
Of course, our poor postdocs won't have to worry about the salary cap, will they? So you can ignore that.
So converting salaries to person months. So on our website, and there's a link below, there is a time and effort calculator, because everyone is not great at math and how to do the conversion. So person month is defined as a metric effort. So it's the amount of time an individual devotes to a project. And effort is based on the appointment type of individual. So calendar year, academic year, or summer. So if you're going to do the work, so you may be a 12-month faculty and you're going to do the work only in the summer. So you're only calculating on 3 months and not actually 12 months of effort. So 25% of a 9-month appointment is 2.25. So that's 9 times 0.25. And same thing for 10% of 12 months, 1.20 person months, conversion 12 times 0.210. So if you're being required to present your effort as a percentage, then you just do 25%. But they may say, well, we want your effort in person months. So you go a little further and you do the calculation as the 9.205 to get how much person months. So the link, like I mentioned, is really great in doing the calculations for you. You can put in the 25% and it will figure out what is the person months.
And I think for our postdocs, they're typically a 12-month appointment.
Yes.
So if you're a 12-month appointment and you're going to devote 10% of your time during the full calendar year on a grant, that's not to say that you're not going to have busy times if you're also teaching, where you might do a little less effort during a spring semester, but do more effort during the summer months. The idea is it's a reasonable estimate of time across a calendar year. So we're not looking for you to give us hourly time frame, like, oh, this week I only did 5 and next week I'm going to do 20. It's really essentially it's an estimate of your effort over a calendar year. So we understand that sometimes things get busy and sometimes things get slow.
Right. Like Jeannie said, you can fluctuate during the fall and the spring semester, you're more busy, so you have less time. But in the summer, you make up all that effort because you have what's going on. You have more time to devote to the project.
Right. And by the way, this isn't money on top of what you make. This replaces institutional money that goes to your salary. So you're devoting this effort, but you also have to be released commensurately with what you're doing here at FAU. So it could be you do less of maybe lab prep. It could be less for maybe an undergraduate course, or if you're doing other types of assignments, then you should be released out of that so you could be doing the research for the grant to that level of time. Okay, so I think on this one, I was going to kind of go over just F&A, and we just call it collectively F&A. But on a high level view of what it is, I always like to tell faculty and anybody who's building a budget, never think about this as a tax, because it's not. It is actually the institutional's commitment to your research project. And by that, it means things we cannot charge line item to a federal, state, or nonprofit individual. So we can't charge, for instance, a postage stamp. We give that's part of the institutional commitment to it, unless, of course, you're mailing out a bunch of stuff for your research, but then that would be a direct cost. But electricity is a really good example. We can't charge the kilowatt hours that runs that portion of the research you're doing in a lab. The insurance to work here, the security that goes into running a university, the lab operations and maintenance. All of these things are calculated in very detail, which is why we have rate agreements. So when you submit a proposal to do research, we fully want to recover the cost of doing that research. I can tell you with 100% assurance, we rarely recover our full overhead. And the reason being is some funders limit the amount of overhead. Florida Department of Health is a great one. They don't like to give us anything at all. So I think it's like maybe 10% or 20% indirect, something like that.
Yeah.
Right. But even if we got our full rate, which our full rate is 52.5%, that's still a negotiated rate. So our full rate, if we were really to have gotten it, would be somewhere in the lines of 60 or 70%. And I like to point out to anybody who thinks that's a high rate, Lockheed Martin typically has 125% overhead rate on anything that they do, because everything that they do has to do with research. And so they have to recover those costs. So even though F&A has these two separate sections, the facilities of the cost of the buildings themselves, and the administrative side of just being able to have a phone and other things, those are the two components that make up the full 52.5%, which is our research rate. And is this one yours or mine? Oh, wait, I don't have the number of the slide.
Yes, it's yours.
Oh, this one. Okay, good. So I kind of went into this also it's 52.5%. And that's for doing research. Very rarely do we use other types of research of other types of rates. They have to fit into whether it's, for instance, a training program. Does that qualify for a different rate because it's an other activity? But we have to look at the sponsor guidelines to be sure that we're applying the right rate to your proposal. So we actually calculate the rate on certain specific components of the budget we just went over. So we apply the rate to any charge, the direct charge. So we went over salary and travel, to all of those things. What we exclude, though, is we exclude any equipment costs. We also exclude tuition. If you do have patient care costs, we exclude that as well. And then we also can't charge F&A on more than 25% of a subaward. So if you have a subawardee who's getting $50,000 as part of your proposal, we can only charge it on the first $25,000, and then that's it for charging it on that. So you're not charging the rate on everything. So there are times where we do apply the full F&A rate on total direct costs, but again, that's based on the particular RFP that you're looking at and the agency as well. Ooh, cost share. Aha.
So cost share. What is cost share? And mandatory versus voluntary. So cost share is referred to as match, is defined as a portion of the project or program costs that are not paid by the funding agency. So if it's not paid by the funding agency, who's it paid by? Well, the only person left is the university. So cost share may be provided by FAU or subrecipients, or we can get other third parties can contribute to the cost share. So some common costs that are cost share include salary support, tuition, and unrecovered F&A. So unrecovered F&A usually will occur when we are not able to use our full F&A rate, our negotiated rate. So if we can't use 52.5 on a research project, but they say cost share is mandatory, I'm going to get into that, then and you can use your unrecovered. So what we don't recover from the 52.5, say they allow 30, the rest, we can use that as part of the cost share commitment and meet our requirements. So mandatory cost share. Well, mandatory cost share is always specified in the RFP, RFA, the sponsor guidelines, and it's required by the sponsor as a condition of obtaining an award, and it must be included for consideration of funding. So if the sponsor has an RFA and they say you can have your budget's a maximum of $100,000 and your cost share is a 1-to-1 match, we have to provide $100,000 in cost share to match the $100,000 that we're requesting in our budget. So if you come up with a situation where you have to have cost share, that is a prime opportunity for you to talk with your mentor or the PI on the project, because that cost share has to be approved by the chair and also the dean's office. Parent-sponsored programs, we cannot approve cost share. We cannot say, yes, the college must provide this cost share, because if the college does not want to provide a cost share and cost share is mandatory, we cannot submit the proposal. The colleges are governed by the dean, and we cannot make them, force them to allow cost share from their departments because they have to cover that amount. Voluntary cost share, generally prohibited under FAU policy. Voluntary cost share is cost share that the sponsor isn't requiring, it's not mandatory, but the PI or co-PI wants to include it in their budget. Now, usually we are under the stance we do not allow voluntary cost share, but there are some situations where it may be allowed. And for instance, the RFA says that cost share is not required, but it is looked at favorably. Then that's telling us you don't have to do it, but if you do include it, we will look at your proposal in a better light. So in that case, we would say, let's include cost share, because they want to see the university's commitment to this project. Oh, it's not mandatory, but you're willing to commit cost share. The FAU's really behind this project and behind the PI. So they look at it a little more.
U.S. Department of Education does that quite a bit and says encouraged. So
yes, they use the word it's encouraged or it's recommended. So we see those words that says for us included. Says encouraged and recommended. It just means included. We'll look at you more favorably. So in those cases, we do allow voluntary cost share.
And from a strategic standpoint too, when I work with faculty on proposals, it used to be a time where they always committed cost share to proposals, thinking that anybody who was reviewing it would see it more favorably. And in fact, because of the uniform guidance now strictly prohibits that only in certain situations, the review process has definitely changed, I would say, over the past 8 to 5 years, where cost share is not considered anything in a budget. Again, it has to do with the strength of your proposal and not necessarily with how much you're bringing to the table. So from a strategic standpoint, I'd like you to also consider cost share is important on those proposals that require it. But in proposals that do not require it, don't get hung up on needing it in order to make yourself in a stronger position, because generally speaking, it doesn't put you in a stronger position if the science isn't sound. So I think with that, we want to leave it open to any kind of Q&A. I know we kind of went rapid fire with some of this. We'll be sending the slide deck out to all of you so you can make sure you have the links. You can always find your representative for OSP on this link. And even though Muriel looks at every single proposal that goes out the door, good for her, right? She's a little exhausted, give her a break. But you have a representative in the college or the unit that you're in. So there is somebody there who does the first initial pass on pre-award. So they're going to be, they can also assist your grant coordinator at your college or your unit level in order to make sure that the budget is sound. There's always me if you want to come to me. And if I don't know the answer, I always defer to Muriel on that because I don't have all the answers for FAU policy. I could just be creative. So with that, Veronica, is there anybody that has any questions, or maybe we can delve deeply into something else for a couple of minutes?
Hi, yeah, I am not seeing any questions in the Q&A now, so please, I encourage you to submit them if you have any. But meanwhile, I do, I do.
Oh, good.
So, but yeah, of course, I do want to allow other people to submit them. So while I'm talking, if you think some other things, please do. Yeah, and I have questions because I had this opportunity, like my advisor told me to, okay, let's write a proposal, and he kind of threw that on me, and yeah, okay, start, like, how do I make a budget? And there were many mistakes that I did as a rookie and that, and so that my questions come from that. And so one of the first questions I had, what if your terms of reference have certain, or from your sponsor, have certain guidelines that have conflicts with the FAU guidelines? Like, for instance, I don't know, like I was thinking travel, and I don't know how much of a conflict is that, but because I didn't really know about the FAU policy on travel, I was making my budget according to like the per diem for the state, which some of them might do. Like, okay, so you have like some kind of like state guidance for how many per city, per whatever. And then I submitted that, and then it turned out, oh, you're wrong, because like FAU only allows that. And so when there are these kinds of conflicts, what do you do?
So the first, when you're doing travel, I know the state has their own, but we always have FAU's policy. So we're going to use the FAU rates for the per diem and for the mileage and all of that, how much food is for breakfast, lunch, dinner. So we always check with the FAU policy. If the proposal doesn't have specific numbers of what they want you to use. So if the RFA says you must use this amount, then we do have to use what the RFA says. But if it just general and says put together a travel, what's your travel expense, then we do have to look at what FAU's policy is and the maximum amounts.
You could also look at it in another way too, is that goes back to the 4 pillars of allowable costs. You know, is it reasonable? Is it allocable? Is it consistently applied? And so I'll go to that for travel. If FAU will only pay a traveler here, an employee, out of its own money to go to a conference at $36 a day, you know, for food, which is starvation level, I know, but you can't use the federal GSA rates in a federal proposal and earn more or make more money in a proposal for, you know, per diem for that. So it's a little frustrating, I know, because of, you know, it's the per diem that Florida allows for is really, really small, but we just can't charge any funder more money. Now, there might be certain circumstances where if maybe it's not a federal funder, I've never seen a federal funder pay more in travel than what we would normally pay as a university. It just doesn't happen because it's an auditing thing. You can't charge the federal government more than what we ourselves would charge for the same type of thing. So is that what you were referring to, Veronica, in terms of the travel?
Yeah, something like that. And also, like, I think you kind of like talked about this, but if we can focus more, is what if like the limit of the allowable overhead is different. So they say, oh, it cannot be more than 50%, and this 2.5%. So I got the answer that yes, it's kind of like it can go on the other thing perhaps, but just to clarify, if we have our terms of reference that have that, so just to be aware that there's a possibility to kind of like still fix it.
Yeah, if they only allow a certain overhead, then we have it documented in the RFP. And so you could charge the lower rate. It's not a big deal. OSP will be like, sure, as long as it's documented. Now,
our rule is we always have to go with what the sponsor allows. So if they said 15%, that's it, we have to go with that 15% because that's what they allow. Even though our negotiated rate may be higher, we can't use that. We have to always go with what the sponsor guidelines say, because the guidelines are what dictates what's allowed, what we can put in this budget. Because even if we say, well, we can do 52.5 and we submit our budget with 52.5, we're not being compliant with what the sponsor put in the RFA when they said 15%. And our thing is always to get the proposal looked at and not rejected without review because we didn't follow the guidelines.
Okay, great. There are a couple more questions coming on in the Q&A. So it says, how does being a senior research fellow change things? Like this is a postdoc level 2, that is there are some changes going on now from the university perspectives in terms of being the lead PI on a project.
so until the policy changes, there's the only way to be a lead PI is to get approval from the VPR. So.
Maybe Gina, you can comment something on this, because I think like now it is allowed.
That's just a policy thing that we don't have control. Well, we do because we try to advocate for more people to apply.
Yeah, with a senior research fellow, they are actually PI eligible. It is updated on the PI eligibility policy, so they can indeed be the lead. So perhaps that is what is referenced by that question, because they can serve as a lead PI. But I still think they can't do it on their own. That's the key. They have to do it in conjunction with their mentor supervisor. They still are a postdoc, and so they still have to follow all the parameters of knowing that they are in a temporary role. So they do need to have their supervisor mentor kind of on the sidelines with them and probably even collaborating with them on their project. So hopefully that helps.
Great. There's another question.
I did just answer that
live. Yeah. So this next question was answered live, and then Iris, can you elaborate more about matching funds? What is allowed?
Sure. So when you say what is allowed, what funds can be used as matching, usually whatever the sponsor allows in their budget is what we can use as matching. And even sometimes they don't allow tuition, but we can use tuition as matching. So usually all expenses can be used as matching. And we have used all expenses as matching. We've used salary, we've used tuition, we've used supplies to cover the mandatory cost share. Again, mandatory cost share. No one encouraged voluntary, so mandatory cost
share. Okay, great. There's another question in the Q&A. If you can see it, I don't really know. Does it make sense?
I think what they're referring to is, so when you're looking for funding specifically for a postdoc, and I did answer David on this as well, the only RFP I can really offhand right now go to is a K99 ROO, which is a kind of like a postdoctoral into a professorial type of a thing. But I would honestly say look at Grant Forward for different opportunities that exist, because you can specifically target postdoctoral eligibility. And so that's what makes Grant Forward very useful to do searches. But again, we're not an aberration. We're not different from a lot of other institutions. And so postdoc, your role as a postdoc if some institutions afford you some allowability to submit proposals, but by and large, you would be submitting through a mentor, through somebody else who would be kind of either the co-I or a lead, or there'd be something along those lines. Because clearly, if you can tie your research and the research of your lab together, you can create a lot of synergy by bringing in multiple grants to a lab and working together. But offhand, the K99 ROO is probably the one that jumps to my mind. There are postdoctoral ones with NSF. I think most of our postdocs here may not fall into the NSF realm, but you could take a look at that. But they're very specific for a particular directorate for funding.
Great. No other questions in the Q&A, but I still have a list of mine. So this is I'm giving time for other people also to keep thinking their questions. So yeah, from my experience, can you elaborate a little bit about personal versus other personal? Because when I was writing, was doing my budget for the first time, it was kind of like, oh, like if you are writing it with your advisor or something, even if a co-PI or not a PI, are you allowed to be put with name, like specific name in personal instead of a postdoc in the other personal? Or if you are writing a proposal as a PI, as a research, like senior research fellow, and you have like a specific student, or you have like a specific people that are students or postdocs that are working in that proposal that are not faculty, can they go under personal instead of other personal?
So it's not just personnel, it's senior key personnel and then other personnel. So usually we're not talking about the postdocs or the faculty, usually the graduate students or the undergraduate students or the technicians, they're in other personnel. When we say senior key personnel, those are usually the PIs, the co-PIs, other investigators on the project, because they have usually more responsibility on the project. They're handling a scope of the work. They have tasks that are assigned to them. So they're key to completing the overall scope of the project.
I would even add to that too, that when you think about those senior personnel, they are also responsible for the management of the grant. So it's not like they get all the accolades and the laurels. Goes with that is the responsibility of ensuring you're costing things properly to it so that people aren't charging things to your grant. You have to do final reporting, both from a scientific and a management standpoint. So, you know, it's one thing to be labeled as a senior key, but you can also write a person's name in other personnel. It doesn't have to be like to be determined. So if you're feeling like let's say you have a great graduate student who's doing this work and they're under other because they're not going to be key, you can still name them, sure, if they're still going to be here by the time the grant is funded. But it doesn't really matter if they're named or not. If you get the award and the student gets the money, they could still put on their resume or their CV that they were grant funded. And so that's really what matters in the end. The proposal itself is, you know, by naming somebody, then you actually almost tie your hands, because it's better to actually not name, if you have to name somebody, great, because they have qualifications. But if you have a graduate student you're writing in that you're going to hire a graduate student on a grant, don't name the graduate student, because you don't know if that graduate student will be here in 8 months if you got the grant. It could be gone. And so you want to be able to put that in for anybody else. That's what I would recommend when you're doing a budget. I wouldn't name somebody unless they absolutely had a skill set that you needed in the grant.
Okay,
that's the other thing with the key and senior personnel. They have a skill set that's needed in the grant.
Needed, yeah.
Yeah, great. So, okay, we have like 3 minutes left before our time, and still no questions. Still, folks, you have like 3 minutes to submit your question if you still have one.
I think we have like 2 minutes though, because we're supposed to be right off at 12.
Yeah, so I have a bunch, but I will kind of like skim through what I. So, how common are proposals with cost share from what you have seen? How common is that the proposal that require cost share?
How come it requires cost share?
Yeah.
Usually that's the sponsor has deemed that proposal has a cost share requirement. We don't necessarily know why. It's just the sponsor has deemed that it should have a cost share requirement. So we have the NSF MRIs, they require cost share, and the sponsor requires that we have that mandatory cost share in there. So it's really the sponsor dictates what requires cost share and what doesn't.
I see another question in the Q&A, but Jen is replying it by writing, so that's okay. Okay. Also a comment, 2 minutes. What about salary increases? I remember when I was doing my budget, like my boss was telling, hey, you have to remember to put annual salary increases for multi-year projects. Is that the thing?
Yes, we do encourage that you put a 3% increase in the outgoing years for the salary and also for tuition.
Yeah.
Yes, tuition, we say 5% increase.
Tuition has also increased. Okay.
Yes. Every year,
yes.
3%.
Yes, we do. Yes, we encourage
okay, yeah,
you put 5%.
That is a good thing to keep in mind for like multi-year proposals. And yeah, I have a couple more questions, but we are under 1 minute, so I think we're going to stop there. And I think like if folks have more questions or whatever, they can reach. Yep. Again, the material is going to be available for that, and this recording is also going to be available in the future. So thank you very much for everybody that attended. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Marielle, for being here. And I think it has been
our pleasure. Glad to help. Bye-bye. Good luck.
Bye-bye.